After winning 9 of their last 10, Miami went to the Big Apple and dropped both games of a back-to-back set versus the Knicks and the Nets to put their record at 10-7 on the season. We'll give you our takeaways from the games and debate if the mounting injuries or their fourth quarter collapses are the biggest concern. And there might be a problem on the horizon with second-year player Nikola Jovic. Why is he frustrated? What happens next? Find out today on this episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg. Joining me as always, David Ramil. However you're tuning in, YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. The Heat ended their road trip with an 0-2 stay in New York, losses back-to-back to the Knicks and the Nets. They had won 9 of their last 10 before those two losses, so they're now 10-7 for the season. David, we're going to jump right into this before we get to Nikola Jovic's comments about his frustrations with his role and our bigger concerns, whether it's the injuries or the fourth quarter issues. But beyond all of that, your takeaway on the stumble at the end of the trip.
This is going to piss off a lot of Heat fans.
Oh, here we go.
But I'm not too worried. I'm not too worried about it.
Okay.
Like, I think that's not what they want to hear. I know what happened against the New York Knicks, and up 21, up 19 in the fourth quarter, then up 11 with just a few minutes left to play, and seemingly able to put the Knicks away. And I know the Knicks are doing a victory lap, but not them. I mean, that's what November games are for the Knicks to do happy little dances and then go back to their rat-infested humps. That's okay. Like, this isn't not the issue here. Like, we're Miami has bigger fish to fry. They don't hang banners up in mid-November. And even though it's an in-season tournament game, and that's a problem for Miami because they do want to win. And I know a lot of the players on that roster want to get the extra check that comes with the in-season tournament win. At the same time, Miami has some issues in the fourth quarter, which we'll address later on, but they just simply couldn't make shots. And I'm not too worried about the offense was bogged down a little bit. And I know that they probably didn't get the same looks they wanted to, but there were a lot of easy looks at the basket that just didn't fall for whatever reason. Bam did not hit a couple of jumpers that he's been hitting with great regularity so far this season. Jimmy missed a three-pointer at the buzzer. We wouldn't even be talking about their fourth quarter collapse if that shot had fallen. Maybe it wasn't the best shot in the world, but we can't, as a fan base, get so hung on one win or one loss. It doesn't define the entirety of the season. And while it is indicative of an issue that needs to be needs to be addressed, I don't think it's severe enough to make people worry and frustrated. And as for Saturday's loss against the Nets, well, hell, 3 of their best players weren't even injured. They had a couple other players out, either in G League or whether or not they were even available to play. It was a very shorthanded team. Obviously, Drew Smith now out for the season, which we haven't recorded since the unfortunate injury against the Cleveland Cavaliers. So he's another blow to their depth there. I'm not too worried about the Brooklyn loss. It is what it is. They just didn't have the players to really mount any kind of real effort against that group. So they'll come back home now. They have a lot of home games over the last few days of November and, of course, through December. This is a good opportunity for them to continue building on what they were able to achieve over that win streak and over the next couple of wins over Chicago and Cleveland. So to me, I look at it as still a positive. It's frustrating. It's demoralizing. It sucks. I get that frustration. Put it past you. Look behind you and just go ahead and move on with the rest of the season.
Well, first of all, you're absolutely right about the Nets game. Nobody cares about that. Everybody was injured. No Jimmy Butler. Obviously, no Tyler Hero. No Duncan Robinson. No Bam Adebayo. And all those things. So we'll get to whether or not those injuries are bigger concerns later on. But it's the second night of a back-to-back. That's a scheduled loss, right? You just write it. All right, we're going to lose that one. Move it along, The Knicks one, it was frustrating. That was a really bad loss. You score 19 straight points to start the third quarter. You blow that game open. You have a 21-point lead against a rival. And it is an in-season tournament game. And that part to me was, I'm kind of in on the in-season tournament, David. Honestly, that the loss stings more because it was an in-season tournament game.
Yep.
Miami's next one and final one for group play is Tuesday night at home against Milwaukee. Obviously, a very important one. But I'm kind of rooting for this team to get to the next round and then ultimately get to Vegas and maybe win this thing. And it has been a fun wrinkle to the season, despite my the fact that I thought it was a little ridiculous. Start. I was pretty cynical about this. I'm like, why are fans going to care? And you know what? People are really simple. If you just put something in front of them and tell them that it's important and tell them to care about it, and you're a competitive person as a fan of a team, you're just going to care about it. We're not that. We're pretty simple people at the end of the day. We're like, okay, the courts are new colors, and this is important. I'm in. Fine. Yep. It's fun for November, December. So that part to me was frustrating, and I guess that's the takeaway. But if I am going to zoom out here, this team was 1-4 to start the season, 3-4 before they started basically the 10-game road trip. I know there was a Brooklyn Nets game in there at home. I don't count it. It was like a one-night stay in your own bed, and you're back on the road. So I'm going to call it a 10-game trip. They went 9-10 before the 2 losses in New York. One of which of those losses was a real loss. The other one was a scheduled, just write that one in, against the Nets. You come back, you're 10-7, you're 2.5 games out of first place as we're sitting here talking. That is a much better spot than where they were at to start the year. There are still issues with this team. I think offensively, it's still very hit or miss. But there's a lot of things that I like about this team. The Jaime Jaquez thing is real. Caleb Martin against Brooklyn going off for 22 points, finally looking a little bit more like the Caleb Martin with the explosive athleticism and all that kind of stuff. He's starting to come along too. Their best basketball is still ahead of them, and I think that's the important thing to keep in mind here. And again, zooming out, they're in a much better spot than they were in to start the season. 10-7, that's pretty good considering where the rest of the East is wide open, I would say. Once you get past Boston, like, who knows who's going to finish second? It kind of feels like Boston's going to roll their way to the number 1 seed here, barring injury. But I think everything else past them, the Sixers are very good, but I don't think that I'm not penciling them in as the number 2 seed. Right now, Orlando has the number 2 seed. Milwaukee's on a roll. And so, yeah, I think the Heat are right in that mix.
Yeah, after going 1-4 to start the season, to be 3 games under 500, now be 3 games over 500 after a very long road trip, as you pointed out, it's a great place for Miami to be. And again, dealing with a loss of Tyler, like you would have thought, and we made this argument. I know a lot of Heat fans kind of have chided us for it, but there were concerns about where the offense would come from without Tyler Hero, and everybody has stepped up as we projected that they would. I mean, that was what was going to be required of this team to make up for what Tyler had been producing over those first few games. And yes, he was a part of that win streak. I understand that, but he's been out for most of this, the stretch over the last couple, 2 weeks now. So I think Miami has figured out a lot of things. They were missing Duncan Robinson, who makes the offense a lot easier, especially in that fourth quarter against New York. I imagine he probably would have been able to play. And when you just need somebody to space the floor, that would have been so much better than having Haywood Highsmith and Josh Richardson and guys like that out there that don't necessarily have the 3-pointer as a strength of their game. It's part of their arsenal.
They have 2 3-point. They have 2 floor spacers, 2 guys that defenses really care about beyond the perimeter. If Haywood Highsmith goes 3 for 4 from 3-point range, defenses will be like, wait, take your hat off. Congrats. Like, Haywood Highsmith, they're not going to.
They're not closing out on. Yeah, they're not closing out on.
Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero are the guys. Going into the 10-game trip there, you and I were like, 3-7. 4-6 would be kind of successful. That was based on where they had been to start the year, and all the injuries and Jimmy Butler not really starting off strong at all. So we're like 3-7, 4-6 feels like it would be almost a success at this point. They ended up going 7-3 over that 10-game stretch. They outperformed anybody's expectations during that stretch. So I think the Heat are fine. The Knicks loss stinks, but guess what? Look across the league. A bunch of teams have losses that stink. It happens. It's the regular season, to the point you made earlier, but. We did see a little bit of Nikola Jovic against the Brooklyn Nets, played 17 minutes in that one. It's been an up and down and a frustrating year for him. Even if you ask Nikola Jovic himself, talking about in some recent comments, suggesting that he is frustrated with his role. We'll talk about what he said and whether the Heat need to address it next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. It's so easy to play. You just pick 2 to 6 players and you go up against their projected numbers. It's not against other players. You don't have to worry about the thousands of other people who might be placing something on a particular player. It's just you against the projected numbers. And with basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, LeBron James and Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made plus receptions. That sounds pretty good. PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and doesn't return for the second, that player gets rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Again, it's so easy to play. Take your time to go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA and make a first deposit match of up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Let's talk now about Nikola Jovic, who played his first extended minutes in Brooklyn of the season, finished with 1 point, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists in 17 minutes. After the game, he spoke with a Serbian media outlet and sounded frustrated with how his season is going. Here's the translated quote, courtesy of Heat Reddit. Quote, "It's not easy. It's really not easy. It's even harder for me than last year. I mean, I kind of feel like I can play and I deserve it. They think I'm not ready yet, and I totally understand. There is nothing there. I don't know where this is going, and all I'm trying to do is be on the field as much as possible. Somehow, even when I'm playing, I feel like maybe I'm being misused. I hope that some things will change. I will continue to work. I really support everything they do for me, and it will get better for sure." End quote. Obviously, this is a translation from one language to another, so I don't want to get too much in the specific wording of things because things do get lost in translation here.
Right.
But it is very clear here that he feels like he's being misused. And that is the part that I want to focus on, and that he is very frustrated. I think that much is clear even from the translation from one language to another. So what did you think of Nico's comments?
I understand 100%, and I empathize with them because, I mean, you've got just a few days earlier, Jimmy Butler screaming at nobody who will be willing to listen, "Don't play Nico at the 5. I'm a big Nico fan. He's not a 5. Quit playing." And yet, Eric Spoelstra, determined as ever, go ahead and play him at the 5 in his few 16 minutes of play against the Brooklyn Nets, and he just looks out of place. That is not his strong suit. And I understand. I've followed Heat basketball long enough and have covered this team long enough after a decade now of knowing what this team does. They have a system in place, and when they get new players, young players in particular, they have a very militaristic approach to getting the most out of a young player. Sometimes it works. They break you down and rebuild you in their image, right? That's the kind of idea behind an armed force or a military group, is that they kind of take you and they want you to be their perfect soldier. And that's how the Heat approach young players. They want you to be their best version. And for a guy like maybe, I don't know, Jaime Jaquez, maybe he's a little bit more used to it. We also have to consider the fact that Jaquez is 3 years older than Nikola Jovic. Jovic didn't grow up that way. He played the sport internationally. He thrived in that sport internationally, which is why the Heat took a chance on him. But the Heat has a vision for who Jovic has to be or who wants to be, and he's not quite ready for that. So I understand Nico's perspective. He's frustrated, and he's saying all the right things. Like, he knows that they're in his best interest, that they're working towards helping him, but they're also misusing him to a great degree. He's not a center. He cannot play the 5 position. Nor should he. He's tall, but that doesn't make we've got
it's his own.
Yeah, that's it. He's playing the 5 because he's tall.
Yeah, it's the only thing of his game that resembles a big man is the fact that he's 6'10", 6'11". That's it. Nothing about anything else he does is anything like a big man. And I understand what you're saying, and that the Heat want people to adjust to the Heat culture thing, and hey, like, we need you to do this and this and this. Like, Gabe Vincent came in as a scoring guard, left here as a 3-and-D point guard. Right? It's like. That it's what's going to happen. The difference between a guy like Gabe Vincent, who was literally undrafted out of the league, and somebody like Nikola Jovic is you drafted him for his skill set in the first round. And I do think that there's a responsibility on a coaching staff to put your players in their best position to succeed. And right now, the Heat have not been doing that. Nikola Jovic actually revealed in this interview that he's the one that asked to go down to the G League because he wanted to get the reps. He just wants to play out there. And he's like, look, I had this fantastic summer and I want to build on it. And I wasn't getting that opportunity with the NBA club. So all of that stuff, I understand where he's frustrated. I agree with Jimmy Butler. We've been on here. So I think he's not even a power forward. I think he's a small forward. I think Nikola Jovic is a small forward. I think he's Larry Markkinen. I think that's the best player comp for him. And with obviously way more passing chops than Larry Markkinen. But in terms of a positional fit, that's where I think he is. The issue here is that if he is going to get time at the NBA level, it almost has to, like, for example, against Brooklyn Nets, no Orlando Robinson, because they've strangely sent him to the G League for some reason before that game. They were limited, no Bam Adebayo, who's out with the hip injury. So they were limited to Thomas Bryant and Kevin Love in that game. And so, yeah, their only minutes available have been at center. And we pointed this out last week when we talked about Jimmy Butler's comments, how he's not a 5. Why is he playing the 5 at the G League? It's because there are no real centers in the G League. All the real 7-footers are at the NBA level because they're so needed there. So everybody just tends to trend small at the G League level. And so you have a lot of people like Nikola Jovic playing the 5, even though they're probably forwards or even maybe in perimeter players at the NBA level. So it's just weird and it's unfortunate, but there's no minutes available with the Heat right now for the positions that he plays best. Jaime Jaquez is better than him right now, so he's going to play in front of him. Caleb Martin needs to play. Haywood Highsmith is starting. Kevin Love is better than him right now. Like, all these guys right now are just better than Nikola Jovic, and the Heat need to win games. So it's unfortunate. My thing here, David, is if they're not going to be able to carve out that time for Nico, is he more like trade bait at this point than actual, in terms of what his value is? Is he more valuable as an asset in a trade down the road closer to the trade deadline? I think if they can't find a way to get him minutes, and if they don't see those minutes being available anytime soon, then they should consider trading him, because he is a very tantalizing, skilled player. But sometimes it's just not the right fit. Sometimes you think it is when you draft him, you're interested, you're intrigued, you grab him, and it just doesn't work out. And we've seen that before.
No, I agree 100%. I don't know if we can answer that question, whether or not he's a better asset or not, because we don't know what the future holds. Like, there might be a scenario where 2, maybe 3 seasons, which is an awful long time in the NBA, and you kind of have to wait for maybe the retirement of Jimmy Butler. If whether or not they can finally put him out there and have him be that playmaking 3 that he should be. But that's also going to take some growth from him. Like, there's no denying. I think for a guy who spent his whole summer training with the national team, and understandably so, because he got a chance to showcase his skill and built his confidence level, which was absolutely desperately needed, he also needs to do a lot more about just defining his body a little bit more. Like, he needs to get either bulked up or at least a little bit more quick. He's not necessarily as lean as some NBA players either, and I think that needs to be his biggest focus for the offseason, because he needs to be strong enough to be able to guard bigs and quick enough to guard
that's the problem.
players.
In this interview too, he talked about, he's like, they put me in a zone defense, like at the back of the zone. He's like, I'm not good at that. And they also say they're not going to let me switch because he has problems in isolation, which he does. And he at least acknowledges this stuff. But the problem is the Heat don't know how to play him defensively. They don't know whether he's a zone guy, a switch everything guy, a man-to-man guy. Like, they're having a really hard time figuring out where he fits defensively. And some of that is his body overall, but also some of it's just basic defensive principles. Like, Eric Spoelstra plays a tough defensive system. It's a multiple scheme, right? You're in zone on one possession, you're playing a soft shell the next possession, you're switching everything the next possession. Like, those are like, it's multiple. And Spo does not trust Nikola Jovic enough to put him out there. And I think that's a big part of this. The G League stuff will help. They play the same basic systems and same principles. They practice the same things, teach the same things.
You're going against more inferior players, though.
For sure. But, I mean, you got to start somewhere, I guess.
No doubt. Yeah.
I wonder if you make a good point. Like, can you see something down the road, whether or not it's Jimmy retiring and minutes open up, or is there another trade to make that's not the Nico trade? Do you anticipate, okay, maybe we're going to move like a Caleb Martin before he hits free agency, or do we try to move Kyle Lowry or something? Like, Tyler Hero coming back, there's going to be even less minutes in the rotation in general. Like, I don't know when that time is, but if you think, okay, the messaging needs to be clear. We know you had a great summer. We know you want to be on the court. You're going to get a bunch of reps in the G League. We'll bring you up and down. Spo already talked about the fact that his next G League stint is going to be an even longer one than the previous one Nico just had. So he's going to be spending a lot of time in the G League this season. I think that's the right thing to do. But do you anticipate those minutes being there next year? And can you message that to Nico where you say, we understand that you're frustrated, but you got to be patient here because we're playing the long game and we still believe in you. Not saying that stuff hasn't been done, but that's the thing that they that's the most important. My most important takeaway from here is you haven't lost him. He's still acknowledging that he needs to get better and he knows why the things that are happening, right? He has a very clear understanding. But as long as that's the communication from the coaching staff and the organization down to Nico, they'll be fine. And I'm not freaking out over these quotes.
Yeah, freaking out is probably too far a reaction. You're absolutely right about that. I just don't. I don't know what the next step is for him because he can't earn the playing time because he's just not good enough defensively, and that could be problematic. You can't outscore your opponents enough to the point where it doesn't matter that you give up as much as you do defensively, which unfortunately is still a concern. But you can't also trade him because he is such a skilled player. Like, I don't know that he's perceived that way league wide, like as far as having his promise. You know, like Markkanen was basically a throw-in too. Like he was a young player. He'd already shown increased scoring opportunities in Cleveland. And so, you know, he had been able to bounce back after being in Chicago and basically being like having no value around the league. And then he was in Cleveland. He was able to boost that up. And then he was sent to Utah where he was able to really blossom. It could just be that kind of process where it could take a couple of years down the road to get to that point where he might be able to defend just well enough where his offensive skill set is able to shine and really be a positive impact for another team.
Patience, right? Patience is key with Nikola Jovic. So, all right, we're moving on. Are injuries or the fourth quarter problems the bigger concern for the Miami Heat? We're going to talk about that coming up.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. As the weather gets colder, the NFL offers stay hot on FanDuel. And right now, new customers get a $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get on the action. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. Go visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and your favorite podcast app. Well, the Heat lost to the Knicks after blowing a double-digit lead in the fourth quarter. They lost to the Nets because all of their good players were hurt. So the bigger concern now, because the Heat have had fourth quarter issues all season long, and these injuries now are starting to pile up. No Jimmy Butler, who's been dealing with that ankle. Bam Adebayo missed that game in Brooklyn. He's been dealing with a lingering hip injury that's kept him out now for 3 different games this year. Duncan Robinson out with the thumb sprain, obviously still no Tyler Hero. You mentioned this earlier, David. Drew Smith out for the season, unfortunately. Haywood Highsmith against Brooklyn hurt his tailbone in that game and did not return after playing only 15 minutes. So injuries starting to pile up here. But the fourth quarter issues are something that go back to basically the start of the season. Which one to you is the bigger concern between the fourth quarter problems and the injuries that are piling up here?
It's not an easy answer. To me, I think the injuries are the biggest concern because I think they kind of feed into the fourth quarter issues. If Duncan's out there against the Knicks, do they lose that game? And I know that it hasn't necessarily been a steady through line over the course of the season because, you know, they have had fourth quarter issues regardless of who's been on the floor, whether it was Jimmy struggling or Tyler struggling or somebody else trying to figure it out. So I know that there's always going to be a problem with the fourth quarter because, well, they don't have that go-to player. They tried to acquire him over the offseason, and Dame Lillard's now in Milwaukee. So they're not going to make that superstar trade for the go-to player that can get things done in the fourth quarter. That's unfortunate. So to me, the bigger issue is then the mounting injuries because if you can stay healthy enough, then you have a chance to beat your opponent into submission in the first 3 quarters, and you don't necessarily have to worry as much about what happens in the fourth quarter. Plus, we've also seen what this team can do in clutch situations last season when they had more clutch games than any other team in regular season history, and then they went on to be absolutely dominant in fourth quarters in the playoffs. So I still think that's the path to Miami for their postseason success is they'll be able to continue to build up what they've done over the last couple of seasons, and I think they'll be just good enough to be able to do that in the postseason without a trade for a superstar that can get you easy offense. That is an issue. Like, I'm not discounting what happens in the fourth quarter. We addressed this last week. We'll address it now, especially after that Knicks loss. They do have a concern in terms of what happens in the fourth quarter because they don't have that go-to player. They can't get to the rim easily enough. They don't have enough three-point shooting. these are concerns regardless of what quarter you're playing. So to me, I think, again, the injuries, you don't want to have a couple players miss time, especially when Duncan was playing so well. Now he's out for a couple games. Can he regain that rhythm just as quickly on Tuesday against the Milwaukee Bucks? We'll find out. Incorporating Tyler back into the lineup. If you're missing one of your best defenders in Haywood Highsmith, if he misses time, what happens? You have to start Kevin Love again. That can just throw off the rhythm that Miami has slowly been building over the last 10 or 11 games. So to me, the injuries are the bigger concern moving forward.
It's so weird. It's like, how much do I actually want to zoom out? Because if I zoom all the way out, injuries are the bigger concern, because I've thought, like, this team is just injury prone. They're small, they're older, and that's what happens. Smaller, older teams do get hurt. And this is the same ankle that's been giving Jimmy Butler problems for years. This hip injury has been lingering for Bam all season long, and it's sidelined him for a couple of games here and there, and it's been close calls here and there. Eric Spoelstra even said, like, he could tell when the hip is bothering him, like against the Knicks, where the hip is bothering him in the fourth quarter. And maybe that does feed into some of those fourth quarter issues if Bam isn't as effective because that hip is bothering him late in those games. So injuries to me are concerned with the way that this roster is constructed. But in terms of this season and kind of what we're talking about a little bit more near term, I think the fourth quarter issues are a big concern. Yeah, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. And I think that the things that are problematic for Miami in the fourth quarter are symptomatic of bigger issues with this team in general. The biggest issue, here's some stats in the fourth quarter. They have the second worst net rating in the league in the fourth quarter. They're 14th in defensive rating, so they slipped from the top 10 to about league average in defense. And they're 29th in offensive rating. They're only scoring 99.5 points every 100 possessions in the fourth quarter. That's awful. They lead the league in mid-range shots in the fourth quarter. They're high up there in threes, but they're dead last in points in the paint in the fourth quarter, and they're not getting to the line basically at all in the fourth quarter. That to me is the biggest problem. David, I don't need to tell you who the culprit is there. When you hear last in points in the paint and not getting to the line, you say, well, whose job is it to do that? It's Jimmy Butler. Jimmy Butler is a minus 3.6 in fourth quarters this season. He's shooting 28% from the field in the fourth quarter. He's getting to the line a little bit, 2.4 free throw attempts every 6.7 minutes. And I think that a lot of Heat fans will say, well, you just got to play Jimmy Butler the entire fourth quarter. Problem solved. But I'll go back. He's only shooting 28%. He's not been awesome in these fourth quarters. The Heat are getting outscored even in the 6 minutes that he plays when he checks in midway through the fourth quarter. So
plus he plays the entire third quarter. I mean, that's just the rotation that Spo has right now. So he's not going to play the entire.
No, I mean, that's the fans don't really like. He should play the whole fourth quarter. I'm like, all right, when is he coming out then? When's he coming out? Because he can't play 48 minutes. He's got to rest at some point. So, but I don't think I think Jimmy just has to be more effective, regardless of the minutes and when they come. Late in games, he has to be better. It's been a little bit better as of late than it was to start the season, but it still hasn't been awesome.
Can I provide a counter to the fourth quarter problems?
Please.
They've been on the road, and you're not going to get the friendly whistle. And I think that's part of the problem also, is that a lot of these games that have been close, or maybe even if you allow a loss or a comeback, New York got a really friendly whistle in the fourth quarter.
They attack the paint, David. I mean, they do. Like Miami, like they don't.
Like Emmanuel quickly got somebody like farted near him, and he got a trip to the line for an and one twice. Like it's just. Those were friendly whistles that Jimmy Butler would probably get at home. And the fact that Miami hasn't played a whole hell of a lot of home games so far this season, I think we'll start to see it balance out. I'm going to go so far as to say by the end of December, their fourth quarter issues won't be gone necessarily, but they'll be a lot higher in terms of their actual rankings, because I think you're going to get those friendly whistles. I think you're going to see a much more fired up team that can hit those buckets late with the home crowd cheering them on, et cetera, et cetera. Like the teams just play better at home during fourth quarters.
And I think you're going to see. The whistle's a fair. It's. I hadn't thought about it. It's definitely fair, but they need to attack the basket more, even when they're at home, to put themselves in positions to get those whistles. And the injuries and all this, like all this stuff, is related, right? Like this is not a binary. Hey, if you solve this hole over here, then we got Miami. Like Spo uses the word, we got to play with intent. We got to play with intent. I use another word for it. Like the problem with Miami is not a lack of intent. It's just the lack of like effort late in those games. It's the fact that this team is just broken down and tired by the time the fourth quarter comes along, because they play so hard for 3 quarters. It's just really hard to do that.
Is that what you saw against New York?
I not necessarily New York. I liked your analysis earlier. It was like a lot of missed shots. like a lot of shots they normally make. If a couple of those go in, we're talking about a win. Yeah, did they let a lead slip away? Sure. But the Heat have let a lot of leads slip away in the fourth quarters and still won. So it's been an issue all along. But like that to me, like looking broader at the fourth quarters in general this year, it's just that this team they settle for mid-range jumpers too much late in games. I like the 3-point shooting. I have no problem with that. But those mid-ranges either have to be taken a few steps back and turn them into threes so that you're able to, because other teams are taking more threes than them, right? So when they're taking threes and you're settling for mid-range shots, I don't care if you're shooting 50% from them, because the other one, if they're shooting it at a 33% clip, your opponent, they're scoring more points for a balance of a fourth quarter. And that's why those comebacks or Miami's double-digit leads tend to disappear. So they need to take more threes and they need to get more efficient shots at the basket. And that to me is intent, it's effort, it's all those things. But they just got to do that stuff better so that they put themselves in positions not to let those leads slip away and to get the calls that you're talking about. But
what did you make of like Bam's dunk attempt on Isaiah Hartenstein in that fourth quarter against the Knicks? Like he said later on that he thought he was going to get a whistle for it, and I saw some Knicks fans saying to him, "Way, it was clean." Like, is that the kind of whistle that he probably gets at home? Like, to just to support the point, exactly. So I think those things kind of make a difference. Like, and he did attack the basket nets, but he also settled for a couple jumpers early on. Caleb Martin did the same thing. Like he had a wide open three when a defender closed out, and I think he still had enough time to shoot the three. Instead, he put the ball down, wound up taking an off-bounds, clunky mid-range jumper that wound up falling out. Josh did the same thing. It's just, guys are still finding their rhythm. They feel magnified, and you're absolutely right. And you brought up this point before. It's a persistent problem that's been there for the whole season. But I think it just feels much more magnified after what happened against the Chicago Bulls 2 weeks ago, or a week ago.
And the fact that Damian Lillard, like you mentioned, is literally leading the league in clutch shooting. That doesn't feel great either.
A little salt in that wound, buddy. It feels really good. Yeah, nice thing.
Thanks for listening. We'll have another show for you guys Tuesday morning, and then going ahead into and obviously Tuesday night after Miami's game against the Milwaukee Bucks. David and I will be watching basketball in person.
Wow, it's crazy.
At a home game, a rare home game here. We'll be recapping that in-season tournament finale for group stage, plus hopefully giving out some credit cookies. So for now, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube and follow us on your favorite podcast app.